Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about calcium. We will go through complete detail biochemistry of calcium, which are the different sources, how it is metabolized, how it is regulated in our body, what is the daily requirement of calcium for our body, and the disorder related with the calcium metabolism. So, as we know, calcium is the most abundant mineral found in the human body. It's making up around 1.5 to 2% of total body weight. So approximately in adult, total body calcium is around 1 to 1.5 kg. Out of that, 99% calcium is seen in bone and teeth, and the 1% remaining is seen in the body fluid and tissue. It is actually a very important biological role that 1% calcium has. If we talk about the sources of calcium, the first and foremost, the dairy products, they are the very good sources of calcium, like milk, cheese, paneer, and so on. Soya milk is also a good source of calcium. Green leafy vegetables like broccoli, green peas, okra, spinach, they are also a good source of calcium. If we talk about animal sources, then the fish is the non-vegetarian source. The fish is a good source of calcium. Apart from that, oranges, dried apricot, soya bean, yogurt, this enriched breads and grains with the calcium, they are the sources of calcium. Now, what is the daily requirement of calcium? As we have seen that it's one of the most important and the maximum abundant nutrient, what we can say mineral present in our body. So we have to take care about daily requirement of calcium. For adult, it is around 500 milligram per day. For children, it is 1200 milligram per day. It's obviously high because the growing children require calcium for their developing bone. During pregnancy and lactation, requirement is increases and we have to provide supplementation. It is around 1500 milligram per day. After the age of 50, there is an increased tendency to develop osteoporosis, or that is a weak bone. So during that time, there is an increased requirement of calcium. So after the age of 50, supplementation of calcium has to be increases. Now what about the absorption of calcium? The calcium is taken in diet principally as calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, and calcium tartrate. Whatever calcium we are taking in the diet, out of only 30 to 40% is absorbed in the GIT. That is mainly from the duodenum and the first part of jejunum against the electrical and the concentration gradient. The process of absorption of calcium required calcitriol. This calcitriol, that is active form of vitamin D, regulates the synthesis of calcium binding protein, that is cal binding, and the transporters, and also a calcium dependent ATPase. Based on this, the calcium is absorbed with the help of calcitriol from the intestine. There are certain factors that affect the absorption of calcium. There are certain factors that increases the calcium absorption, like calcitriol against the active form of vitamin D, PTH, parathyroid hormone. Acidic pH of gastric juice also favors the absorption of calcium, as well as high protein diet containing lysine and arginine also increases the calcium absorption. There are certain factors that decreases the absorption out of them, that is calcitonin and glucocorticoids that decreases the calcium absorption. Phytic acid and oxalates, they produces the insoluble complex with the calcium like calcium phytates and calcium oxalates and prevents the calcium absorption. Alkaline pH of gastric juice reduces the calcium absorption. High phosphoric acid content of diet that again forms a calcium salt and prevents the calcium absorption. High dietary fibers also reduces the calcium absorption. The phosphorus and magnesium content in the diet, if it is high, it also prevents the calcium absorption. So it is inverse relation with the calcium absorption with that of phosphorus and magnesium. Now, what are the different biological role or functions of calcium in our body? There is a list of functions that carried out with the help of calcium in our body. You can see I have made it simpler by making all the functions started with the C. We'll see one by one. Like first important one is calcification of bone and teeth. As we know, 99% of calcium of our body is present in bone and teeth. Coagulation of blood, we will see one by one each and every one. Then the calmodulin activity for the enzyme activity or the enzyme function, contraction and excitation of muscle fibers, conduction of nerve impulses from pre to post synaptic neurons, conveying the message like for the secondary messenger for the controlling the secretion of hormone like insulin, PTH and calcitonin, cardiac contractibility, and calpains, that is calcium dependent protease that helps in the cell mobility. So you can see all the functions of calcium started with the C. I have made it like that so it becomes easier to remember all the functions of calcium. Now we'll see one by one. Calcification of bone and teeth. As I told you, the 99% of total calcium present in bone and teeth. Bones they usually act as a calcium reservoir. Whenever it required calcium in blood, it causes demineralization with the help of osteoclast. And whenever there is an excess calcium in the blood, that calcium goes for the mineralization in the bone that is induced by the osteoblast cells. Coagulation of blood. The calcium itself is a factor 4 of coagulation cascade. We know there are various coagulation factors and that continues in the coagulation cascade for the process of coagulation. So out of that various factor, the factor 4 is itself a calcium and it helps in the coagulation of blood. It produces the substances that are responsible for thromboplastic activity of blood. Contraction and the excitation of muscle fiber, that is whenever there is a signal, neuronal signal reaches to the muscle, the calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It is one of the storage, intracellular storage of calcium, the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Once the calcium is released, it activates the ATPase enzyme and that increases the action of actin and myosin that facilitate the excitation, contraction, coupling. So the trigger of muscle contraction is actually an interaction between the calcium and troponin C. So you can see the calcium plays a very important role in contraction and excitation of muscle fibers. Calmodulin activity. The calmodulin is a calcium binding regulatory protein. That calmodulin binds with the calcium. Then calcium bound calmodulin complex activates the kinase enzyme. This activated kinase phosphorylates the enzymes and then this phosphorylated enzyme carried out its biological effect. So there are a list of enzymes that are activated by calcium calmodulin complex. Here it is like adenyl cyclase, calcium dependent protein kinases, calcium magnesium ATPase, glycerol 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, glycogen synthase, that is an important enzyme of glycogenosis, phospholipase C, phosphorylase kinase, pyruvate carboxylase, pyruvate dehydrogenase, and the pyruvate kinase. So these are all the enzymes. They are activated by calcium calmodulin complex and by the phosphorylation. Then for the conduction of nerve impulse, that calcium helps in the nerve impulse transmission from presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neurons. Conveying the message, as I told you, that calcium acts as a secondary messenger, conveying the message. By that way you can remember it starts with the C. This calcium acts as a secondary messenger for different hormones, for example like glucagon, and this used as a secondary messengering system involving the G protein coupled receptor as well as along with the inositol triphosphate. Then the controlling the secretion of hormone. Again, it started with the C. This calcium mediates the secretion of varieties of hormones from the cells like insulin, parathyroid hormone, calcitonin, vasopressin. They are under the control of calcium level. Cardiac contractility. This calcium prolongs the systole. If there is a hypercalcemia, it may cause cardiac arrest or stop the heart during the systole. So whenever there is a need of giving calcium to any patient for particular disease, it has to be given very slowly, otherwise it may lead to cardiac arrest. Now we have seen that out of total calcium, 1% is present in the blood and plasma, 99% in bone and teeth. Out of that 1% that is circulating calcium, it is also again present in the different forms, and it is very important. Out of the total circulating calcium, 50% is in the ionized form. The remaining 50% is in bound form. Again, out of that remaining 50%, 40% calcium bound to the protein, particularly to the albumin, and the remaining 9 to 10% that is complexed to anions. So it says that the normal plasma calcium level is around 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. It is very well regulated and maintained in this narrow range of 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. The calcium present in plasma, as I told you, it is present mainly in three types. 50% is ionized calcium, that is around approx 5 milligram per deciliter, and it is the most metabolic active form of calcium. The 40% is around approx 4 milligram per deciliter, is bound with the protein, particularly to the albumin, and it is non-diffusible. It does not have any active metabolic role. The calcium that is complexed with anion, it is around approx 10%, so 1 milligram per deciliter, and it is complexed with the anions like phosphates, bicarbonate, and citrate. Now, as I told you, the calcium level is very well regulated in the narrow range of 9 to 11 milligram per deciliter. That is called calcium homeostasis. That is mainly regulated by three factors, that is calcitonin, it's an hormone, calcitriol, that is active form of vitamin D, and the third is PTH, parathyroid hormone. We'll see the role of that in the calcium homeostasis. The calcitriol, vitamin D, you will see the proper function of vitamin D and the related biochemistry of vitamin D in our previous videos. The link is given in the description. You can go through that again. This calcitriol, that is active form of vitamin D, increases the calcium absorption from the intestine through a cal-binding protein. Okay. Along with that, it also increases the renal reabsorption of calcium and phosphorus, and it causes increased mineralization of bones. So overall, the function of calcitriol is to increase the blood calcium level by increase the intestinal absorption and increase the renal reabsorption. PTH, that is parathyroid hormone, secreted from the parathyroid gland. It produces the calcitriol or activate the calcitriol hormone to increase the calcium absorption from the intestine. So indirectly, it increases the calcium level by increasing the calcitriol activation. It decreases the renal excretion of calcium. Here, it is opposite to the calcitriol, that it increases the excretion of phosphorus, while calcitriol increases the reabsorption of phosphorus, and PTH also causes demineralization of bones. So the ultimate role of PTH is to increase the calcium level in the blood whenever it falls by increasing intestinal absorption, by decreasing the renal excretion, and by causing demineralization from the bone. The calcitonin, that is the third hormone, the third component of the calcium homeostasis that decreases the serum calcium level, while the other two increase the serum calcium level. Calcitonin prevents the resorption of bone by inhibiting the osteoclast activity. So it prevents the demineralization, as well as it also decreases the renal reabsorption of calcium, means it increases the calcium excretion through the urine whenever there is increased calcium in the blood. So, as I told you, PTH activates the vitamin D, that is calcitriol. This calcitriol from the gut, it increases the serum calcium absorption by increasing the production of, or by causes transcription of gene for the cal binding protein. Apart from that, PTH causes increase the reabsorption of calcium from the renal tubules and deresorption or demineralization. So resorption or the demineralization of bone, and in turn increase the serum calcium level, while the calcitonin and the vitamin D that causes mineralization of bone. So it works something like this. Whenever there is a fall in plasma calcium level, it stimulates the release of PTH, parathyroid hormone. Increased PTH causes activation of vitamin D by causing hydroxylation of 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, and it forms 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol, that is an active form of vitamin D. Then this active form of vitamin D increases the calcium absorption from the intestine that goes to the blood. Again, this with PTH and the activated vitamin D causes reabsorption of calcium, so it also increases the calcium level in the blood. And this activated vitamin D causes mobilization of calcium and causes mineralization. When if it is fall in calcium level, the PTH and vitamin D both causes mobilization of calcium and causes demineralization. So ultimately they turn to increases the plasma calcium level, and increased plasma calcium level again inhibit the release of PTH that was stimulated due to fall in plasma calcium. So this is the way how the plasma calcium level is maintained with the help of PTH and calcitriol. Now we go through the disorders related with the calcium metabolism, that is hypercalcemia and hypocalcemia. So hypercalcemia is called whenever there is a calcium level is more than 11 milligram per deciliter. The causes for hypercalcemia is like hyperparathyroidism, increased PTH causes increased calcium level, multiple myeloma, Paget's disease, metastatic carcinoma of bone, thyrotoxicosis, Addison's disease, benign familial hypercalcemia, dehydration severe, and the prolonged immobilization. So these are the causes that lead to increases plasma calcium level. There are signs and symptoms based on what we can diagnose the hypercalcemia. The first of all, whenever there is a patient suffering from hypocalcemia, have a diminished reflexes and short QT interval on electrocardiogram, and patient present with the symptoms of polyuria, dehydration, confusion, depression, fatigue, nausea, vomiting and anorexia, abdominal pain, and sometimes if it is a prolonged hypercalcemia, patient have a renal calculi also. Patient can be managed by adequate hydration. Usually patient is dehydrated by the IV normal saline. We can give furosemide, that is a diuretic, to promote the calcium excretion. If there is an excess calcitriol, we can give steroid to the patient, but the definitive treatment is the treatment of underlying cause for the hypercalcemia. This is the for the acute management, but the underlying cause has to be treated to complete cure of hypercalcemia. The other condition is called hypocalcemia. Hypo, as we know, it's a low level of calcium. The calcium level falls are less than 8.8 milligram per deciliter. The causes are accidental surgical removal of parathyroid resulting in decreased PTH, pseudo-hypoparathyroidism, primary or secondary hypoparathyroidism, malabsorption syndrome with decreased calcium absorption, renal failure and nephrotic syndrome in which there is a renal reabsorption of calcium is decreases, liver disorder or renal disorder in which the function or the activation of vitamin D is affected. There is a vitamin D deficiency. It may be a dietary deficiency or activation disorder, or hypoalbuminemia because the the decrease in the albumin level also decrease the calcium level because one of the portion of calcium is bound with the protein. The patient the patient with the symptoms of muscle cramps, paresthesia, especially in the finger, decreased sensation, neuromuscular irritability, muscle twitching. If there is a tetany, you will see it appear with the Chostek signs or the trousers sign. There is a seizure, convulsion, bradycardia, and electrocardiogram. We can see prolonged QT interval. That is contrast to the hypercalcemia. Now, when the calcium level falls more than the 7.5 milligram per deciliter, when it is less than 7.5 milligram per deciliter, that hypocalcemic condition is called Tetany. It is a life-threatening condition resulting in increased neuromuscular irritability. The basic feature of this condition is uncontrolled, painful, prolonged contraction, that is a spasm of particular voluntary muscles of hand, that is carpopedal spasm. Along with that, the associated findings may be in the form of larynxmus and the stridor. So, in Tetany, there is a Chostek sign. As I told you, it's a neuromuscular irritability. So, in which the twitching of facial muscle is done. Twitching of facial muscle is done in response to, if we tap, in response to that, there is a twitching of facial muscle is done. Okay, so that is called Chostek sign. There is a trousers sign in which we can precipitate the attack of carpopedal spasm by inflating a blood pressure curve to a certain level above the systolic pressure for 3 minutes. Tied a blood pressure curve, keep it above a systolic pressure for a few minutes, that precipitates the carpopedal spasm, that is a trousers sign. There is a ups sign also in which there is a hyperexcitability. There is a hyperexcitability of muscles to an electrical stimulation. So this is a typical signs, or we can diagnose the Tetany by eliciting this particular signs. So in the hypocalcemia, we can treat patient with the oral calcium and with vitamin D supplementation. The calcium level is marginally down. Again, the underlying cause has to be treated. If patient is suffering from tetany, it needs IV calcium gluconate. Usually 10 ml of 10% calcium gluconate has to be given over 10. It's a life-threatening condition, so it has to be given immediately, but slow IV. If we give with a speed that IV calcium gluconate, that may leads to cardiac arrest, as we have seen in the functions of calcium. So IV calcium should be given very slowly and along with the ECG finding. So thank you so much. This is all about calcium. I hope all of you understand about the calcium functions and the related disorders and its homeostasis. So if you like it, so kindly subscribe and share this channel. For more update, you can visit our Insta account, that is @biochemistry for student. Again, thank you so much.